Hello and welcome to my newest paint night tutorial. We're going to be starting this off with a 9 by 12 canvas. I'm just covering this with a straight up blue acrylic paint. I'm just going to cover up the entire surface of the canvas. I'm not using any water because I don't want to liquefy it too much. I want a nice sort of thick base of paint. So I'm doing sort of a cross-hatching motion, which is just going back and forth in an X, and that'll mean I don't have too much of a streaky look. It's kind of texturized. I'm also bringing in a little bit of white, and that's just to lighten up the color a little bit. So this is obviously sped up a little bit, so feel free to pause and catch up whenever you need to. It'll be back to normal speed once I begin the painting itself. So I'm not going to let this base dry before I go ahead and start painting our subject, which is of course a horse in this case. I want to be able to use that blue and mix it with the white. So I'm just going straight in with my big brush. I've grabbed a little bit of white and I'm using the edge of it to do the profile of the front of the face of the horse. Now I'm coming down with the broader side of the brush and doing a half circle to define the cheek of the horse. Then I pull that down into sort of a slightly tapered rectangle. That's going to be the muzzle of the horse, which I'm going to leave unfinished right now. I'm just going to start filling in while my paint is wet with a little bit of white. I don't want the whole thing to be white, so I'm just blending in a little bit of white paint into that blue. Now I'm constructing the muzzle, so I'm just bringing that down to a little point up at the front. And the neck is just another curve, not quite a half circle, a little less round than that. And then I'm just doing the same angle of curve down at the bottom for the bottom of the neck. And filling that in with some white as well. Once again, not too much white. I want it to be very subtle. Darkening it up a little bit. Didn't like how light it got, so I'm just using a bit more blue on the underside of the neck. And going back to the front of the face and the top of the neck with a little bit more white just to lighten it up. Now I'm going to go in with a little more color. It's kind of bland when it's just that soft white. So I'm bringing in some red mixed with blue, which of course makes purple. And I'm just going to brush that in. I always use those sort of cross-hatch X motions with my brush to blend. That makes everything really nice and soft. Just brushing lightly. I haven't used any water yet. I want my paint to be as thick as it can be. I try to just wipe my brush off on a cloth or a paper towel in between colors. I don't want to use water almost at all. Alright, so I'm switching from my large brush now to the medium brush for the first time. I'm going to be using some shadows to define the shapes of this horse's neck a little bit better. So I've gone along the outside of that half circle that we did for the jaw and along the bottom of the neck, and I'm going to fill in that sort of wonky triangle with some black. And that's going to be our first shadow. And then I'm going to blend it out, just really scrubbing away with my brush. And I'm going to make the muzzle darker as well. So once again, just darkening up that little triangle up at the front with some black and blending it out up the muzzle and cheek of the horse. You can see that the bottom sort of lip and chin there comes down a little bit. So it's not perfectly smooth. There we are, just using that brush and I'm being very light. I'm not touching the canvas very much, just using the very tips of the brush bristles. And that will mean I don't go too far into the color below. I just brush it lightly on top. And I'm just going to keep darkening it with more black paint until I'm happy with how dark it is. If you feel like you've got too much paint on the canvas and you can't really control it anymore, you can let it sit and dry for a couple of minutes, or you can even wipe away some of that excess paint and sort of start the area over again. I just push the paint around until I'm happy with the shapes. At this point, I just cleaned off my brush so there's no paint on it. I'm just moving around the paint that's already on the canvas. I'm doing the eye of the horse here, and horses' eyes are, they're very oval shaped, so they are flat at the front and then they come back down to a bit of a point at the back. This is a little bit stylized here, so I'm incorporating the darkness of the eye into the shadow on the nose bone as well. If you want to, you don't have to do this. You can just do sort of a circle where the eye is. But this is just going with the intense look that this painting is going to have at the end. So I'm just pulling the eye forward into a very long triangle and a sort of a shorter triangle out the back of the eye. A good rule of thumb for where to place the eye is sort of 2/3 of the way between the tip of the nose and the pole, or where the ears are going to be, so the top of the head. So you want it to be closer to the top of the head, so not right in the middle, but not way up at the top. Once again, the perk of having a lot of paint on the canvas is that you can keep pushing it around a lot. So now I'm going back in with my big brush and just straight black, and I'm going to follow along the edges of this horse's face and neck. With the black, I'm doing the mane at this point, so it doesn't really matter what direction I'm pulling the paint at this point, but I'm gonna start brushing it out into nice long sort of locks of hair blowing in the wind. Yeah, so I'm just brushing it on and then I'm pulling the paint sort of to a point. And the way you do that is you press harder when you first put the brush on the canvas, and then by the time you finish your stroke, it's barely touching. And that's how you get that fine point at the end of your brush stroke. So by pressing harder at the beginning and pressing lighter at the very end when you pull the brush off of the canvas. I'm just continuing to add more mane at the top. I've decided sort of on a point at the neck where this is all going to start coming forward. Again, being very careful as I follow the edges, because I don't want to mess up that line that I did earlier. If you do, it's no big deal. The mane can sort of, it's flying all over the place, right? So it can come in front of the horse, but I want a lot of it to be behind the horse at this point. So yeah, I'm just being playful here, moving paint around, deciding where I like things to be. And you just keep doing this step until you're happy with it. You'll notice at this point that the horse still doesn't have any ears or anything, so don't worry about that. That's all going to happen later. Right now, I'm just getting all this mane going on. Sometimes you're gonna do a stroke and you don't really like the look of what it's doing, and that's okay. I usually just add a little more paint and move it the way you think it should go. Cover it up, try again. I'm just gonna blend everything. I want it to be a little bit darker down there at the bottom. So I'm just brushing a tiny bit of black and blue just to blur everything a little bit. Just bringing a little bit more color in there. I don't want it to be too black and white. I want quite a bit of blue. Sometimes it's nice to practice a stroke with no paint on your brush before you put paint on, just to get your hand going where you want it to go before you commit to it. So now I'm grabbing some red with my tiny brush and I'm adding some nice red streaks for some fun color. So these ones are coming the other direction. They're coming forward over the horse's neck. These are just the sort of loose strands. Now, if you've been using a lot of paint, you might need to wait for the black to dry a little bit before you start putting the red over top. But I haven't used a lot of paint on this, so it's already mostly dry, and I can come right over with this red. I'm doing these pretty much randomly, going in all sorts of directions, as long as it's being pulled forward with all that hair that's blowing in the wind. So you can do any colors in here that you have. I'm keeping it to a very simple color palette for this one, but if you have yellow or green or any other colors of paint at home, you can bring them in and make it even more colorful. I'm just doing some more crazy strands of hair. I've switched to white, of course. These are going to be the really bright strands that are standing out. I didn't really like that strand, so I'm making it thicker. I'm just going to keep playing with it until I like the way it looks. If I really hated it, I could just wait for it to dry and cover it back up with black and try again. It's always the nice thing about paint is it's very forgiving. You can always just cover it up and try again. So I'm being very light with my brush. I'm barely touching the canvas, and that's going to give me nice thin lines. They always feel a little bit more natural that way when the bristles of the brush are doing the work. If you want these white and red streaks to be a bit more subtle, you can water it down at this point. It just won't be as bright. But you can tone everything down a little bit if you want to by using water. I'm doing some blue streaks now. I'm not going to do very many of these, but I will put a few in. And really this painting could be done in any colors. You could use a red base, you could use a green base. I think yellow would be very beautiful, but that's very much up to you. So I've cleaned off my tiny brush and I'm going in with some white, and I'm going to outline all of our main areas. So I'm about to draw the ear, which is sort of a candle flame shape. So a sort of a curved triangle. Now my horse is galloping and it's a bit intense, so it's got its ears put back. If you want a happier looking horse, you'd put those ears forward. And now, once again, using the very edge of my brush very lightly, I'm just outlining the front of the face. Of course, I've done the mouth there, and the underside of the jaw. I'm going to come up a little bit into there just to do some of those jaw muscles, and down into the cheek, which is that big semicircle. And under the neck. And that's going to highlight the big neck muscle there. I'm adding a few more little bits of mane flying there. I want this to be crazy. All right, and around the nostril, sort of a circle with a tail at the top. You can do it perfectly round, or a D shape usually works pretty well, like a capital D. I'm going to add a little highlight on the eye. I'm just going to put a little dot at the front of the eye, and then up over the eye, just highlighting where that sort of brow bone would be, and then the front of the nose. Now this is more or less done at this point. I'm just going to keep playing around and putting streaks where I want them. I could go back in with some black if I wanted more black lines. I'm bringing in a little bit more white. This is the stage where you just fix all the little things that aren't quite right yet. Sorry if you hear some background noise, there's some traffic outside. Now, if you want to, you can also paint the sides of your canvas, either with that blue or black, and that will make it look a little bit nicer when it's hanging on the wall if you don't feel like putting it in a frame or anything. It's also perfectly acceptable to leave it white. Once again, just going around, darkening things that I think need to be darker, lightening things that need to be lighter. At this stage, that first layer that we did is now quite dry, so it's easier to go over with black. It shows up better. So I'm just going to darken it a little bit in some spots. Well, thank you very much for joining me in painting this piece. I'm calling it Colors of the Wind for obvious reasons. If you have any questions, if you need help with any stage of this piece, you can always reach out to me on any of my social media profiles. If you have any suggestions for future pieces or suggestions on how I could improve the tutorial side of things, feel free to let me know. I'm just putting my signature there. You don't have to. You can put your name on the back or on the front or not at all, whatever you want to do. All right. I think I'm done at this point. Maybe.